Ready?
Okay.
Hi, folks. This is Dr. Kat Schreier with another great interview here at the National Conversation on Integrated Water Information for the 21st Century with NOAA and all the other federal agencies dealing with water and University, U.S. Water Partnership. And one of the panels this morning was head of Association of Floodplain Managers and State Floodplain Managers and the head of the Water Agency for Sonoma County, so plenty of wine there, as well as our latest guest, and I'm going to forget how to pronounce it.
Upmanu.
Upmanu. Okay, yes, that's something straight out of my Greek Greek wedding. Upmanu. That's what you say when you break the plate.
Okay.
Okay. And Upmanu Lall at Columbia University Water Center, and has been really one of the main go-to folks out of the university to talk about these sorts of issues of water and people and water information. And so this panel was talking a lot about different perspectives on how we need water information for extremes. I think that would be a good way to put it. Extreme events, climate extremes of floods, of droughts, of the impacts associated with changes in climate. So what did you get out of the panel this morning?
Well, I think the interesting thing was the discussion by the person from Sonoma County and the hope that he places on improved predictability of atmospheric rivers to help them manage their reservoirs better. As he put it, 80% of their rainfall precipitation actually comes from these atmospheric river events.
Now, explain by the way, this is our water citizen here. Explain for our water citizens, what is an atmospheric river?
The atmospheric river is really cool. It's basically a feature where water evaporates in the tropical ocean, in the Pacific in this particular case, and forms a filament which is typically between 50 to 250 kilometers wide, and that filament slowly moves towards North America, and where it has landfall, and in the case of the Sonoma County, it's the Russian River Basin, you end up with a major flood. And essentially what it is that the instantaneous amount of water being transported through the atmosphere is usually greater than the water flow in the Amazon River. So that's why they're calling it the atmospheric river.
So it's kind of like the reverse of a riptide.
Yeah. So once it shows up and there are mountains and the air has to rise over it, it dumps. So the cool thing about it is that you can sort of see it coming for 2 weeks. The bad thing is you can't count on the trajectory. So if you shift it by a little bit, it ends up in the wrong river basin. So they get flooded and you don't.
Right.
And so that's the big uncertainty. So what he's hoping is that with the work that they are supporting from NOAA and US Geological Survey, they will get 90% accuracy in predicting where this wonderful thing goes, and then they will be able to do something about it.
Now the folks who do cloud seeding, weather modification, I know that there was talk in the past about managing the entire Colorado River Basin, for example, to get clouds to dump right over Colorado River reservoirs.
Yeah.
Is that something you're looking at?
No.
No?
And it's not altogether clear that cloud seeding works. It works until someone sues you, and then it doesn't work.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is different. This is just a natural phenomena. And like this last winter, California was supposed to get wet because of the El Nino, and it didn't happen. And part of that was because the jet stream was centered further north than it usually is during an El Nino event.
Okay.
And so as a result, these atmospheric river guides were also further north. They were not where they were hoping they would get. So that's, that was interesting. Then the guy who was from the floodplain group, that was interesting too, because it seems that that's an area where we've got a certain degree of rigidity in terms of how policy has been framed, and that rigidity is in the sense of let's draw a line here. It's a 100-year flood. This side of that you're okay. The other side of that you're not okay. And he was talking about the fact that there's actually no certainty about that particular information. You may have estimated the 100-year flood from 10 years of data or 30 years of data or 50 years of data, which may or may not be representative of what happens in that place. So he was doing a little bit of an odd thing. He was calling it the average of the 100-year event, and nobody would actually design a bridge without a factor of safety, but
Right.
actually
And
the
you
factor
only
of
design for the 100-year flood, and that's it.
yeah.
And,
But
and there was no
the thing is that the 100-year flood is a god or a god given or a Congress given threshold that they decided was acceptable risk for people. It's meaningless in any case. But since that's been passed down as the dictum, he wants a
legacy.
factor of safety on top of that,
Yeah.
which would probably mean the average 1,000-year flood, right? But that's the strange game that people
And that's
get
how we
into.
end up getting a 100-year flood every 10 years. Now, but one of the things that I thought was interesting about what he said was, and this also came up with some of the weather folks. This idea that the deputy administrator was talking about as a weather guy getting into water, and there's been a lot of talk in water about this kind of this one water idea, and we're all water, drinking water, wastewater, groundwater, surface water, we're all just one water. But actually, people who are specialists and experts in water and agencies and regulators and funding programs tend to be focused on the mission of that particular organization. I mean, it's not just silos that they can't think about anything, but their job is to think about this. And so when they do think about things that are outside of their mission, it's like, well, I was curious about it, so I Googled it. It's not something that's at their fingertips.
So, like today, what was interesting was that the NOAA people or the floodplain person talked about surface water, and the minute the groundwater question came up, their response was, well, that's not what we do. It's not in our mandate. It's somebody else's problem. And then you have on the other side, as Kat is saying, the people who look at one water. But I think the one water idea is the right idea. The challenge is that there is no accounting of water of any sort, it seems like. So when you start putting together a one water story, I think the only time I've seen this stick is when someone offers to buy your wastewater, then all of a sudden it's valuable.
Well, and it's only looking at water from a water supply aspect, water quality with respect to how people would use it. So it's again getting in water supply. So it's surface water and groundwater, but then you also add with recycled water you can bring in your wastewater, but it's certainly not atmospheric water. It's certainly not soil moisture.
Yeah.
It's groundwater if it's enough to have an aquifer that you could actually use it. But if it's still bound up in the Betos zone, that's not part of one water.
Yeah.
Right? But green
crop scientists, it
yeah.
is, right?
Yes. Yeah. So more and more we're expanding that idea of what water do we think about and how do we integrate the way we talk about it. And even things like Betos zone, that's something that a floodplain manager might not talk about, but a groundwater person would. So anyway, you were also going to talk about some things. Now there was a question that came up for you about water and food in India.
Yeah, so the basic issue is everyone talks about the water, energy, food nexus now. And this concept originated with the World Economic Forum, WEF, water, energy, food, that's why it's in that order. And they put out this little booklet in 2009.
I got you. So it's not the Water Education Foundation or the Water Environment Federation.
No, it's the World Economic Forum.
All those WEFs, yes.
Yeah. So the concept came up because food and beverage companies primarily were pushing an understanding of water as a risk factor for companies within the World Economic Forum. And the Global Agenda Council on Water, constituted by the World Economic Forum, of which I was a member at the time, they decided that they should highlight this. And it's very interesting how the dynamics of that works, because if you go and look, prior to 2008, water would not show up in the top 10 global risks identified by the CEOs of companies. But by 2011, it's become a regular feature. So,
I mean, that was one of the things that we tried to promote when we first got started in 2012, was looking at that listing of how many people are aware of water. Yes, there are people like you, water citizens, who want to know about water, but not all of you actually have a job that involves water per se.
yeah, I wrote a paper in 2006 looking at global water, and at that time we did a search for climate change. A few million hits on Google. We did a search for water crisis, a few thousand hits, and then we did a search for water crisis and United States, right?
Right.
And it dropped to like, tens of hits basically.
Nobody.
So there was no one who was interested. And if you search the water crisis hits, they were mostly an articulation of so many billion people don't have access to safe drinking water. And what really puzzled me was that there was no understanding of the fact that one of the reasons that happens is that you have decimated the resource in those places. So how do you expect to have access to safe drinking water? But tons of programs from the UN and other similar organizations have focused on how do you achieve safe drinking water access, and a lot of money gets spent on it. But they don't understand that if you don't have water, you don't have access to safe drinking water. And if you pollute the water, you don't have access to safe drinking water. So going around building kiosks with treatment systems is really not the answer, but that's where much of that effort, unfortunately, has gone internationally. And so from that point of time to today, the fact that there is a much greater dialogue, whether or not it is properly informed is a different question, but the fact that there is much greater dialogue on the water issue is interesting to see, because people's awareness has gone up, and there is now an understanding that if you eat a hamburger, you are consuming a lot of water. If you're wearing a cotton shirt, you're using a lot of water, etc., which even hydrologists, highly regarded hydrologists, didn't seem to know.
Well, in the issues that we have with that, where because that's about the time WaterCitizen started, when a lot of that was coming out, and it was also crisis focused. I mean, I just gave away my water sexy button to someone who's gone on the hill tomorrow. So that usually we talk about water is sexy because everybody immediately was talking about water was talking about from the perspective of water crisis, global water crisis, California water crisis, whatever, crisis du jour, and not talking about the positive, cool, fun, sexy things. So yes, crisis will get attention, but it doesn't really get people engaged because people get crisis fatigue. You can only take, there's a food crisis, there's a crisis for women, there's a race crisis, there's crises left and right. How do we sort through all these crises? But if it's presented in hey, there's solutions, and if we all come together and here's some cool stuff going on.
I mean, the thing is that today, at least in the US, we are facing a situation where most of our infrastructure is really old. And the crisis thing is not the right way to put it, but we've got to do something.
Yes.
Because if you have a bunch of dams that are likely to fall apart and flood people and kill a few 100,000 people, that's not exactly something
waiting to happen.
Yeah, that's not something you want to overlook as a thing. And so when I asked that question today, the answer I got was not entirely satisfying. They basically said, yeah, we should remove some dams that are not really serving a good purpose. But that doesn't address the fact that there are dams that might be serving a good purpose, but are still old and likely to fall apart. What do you plan to do about that? And if you're going to have more floods and droughts, historically, we use dams to buffer that.
Yeah.
If you don't have dams, that's fine, but you need a plan to do how you're going to deal with it. And the discussion didn't quite go there.
Yeah, that this idea that the utilities are focusing on the aging infrastructure and our
Pipes.
pipes in our city systems. But the dams are not run by the utilities. The dams are run by the big federal agencies that put the dams in the first place.
Yeah, and they are huge capital expenses.
And those
so
are
it's not going to
and it requires
happen
congressional
spontaneously.
approval, and so they're either bureau dams or they're core dams.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if private parties start asking for permits to build dams. I have no idea what would happen.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah.
Water citizens must have the answer. Somebody out there wants to build. Don't you want to build a dam? You always want to build like one of those really nice, like Hoover, with the nice Art Deco kind of ones. Like if you built a dam, you'd build a really cool dam.
Well, I mean, one of the choices in renewable energy is hydropower. So around the world, people are adding a lot of hydropower capacity, small hydro, big hydro.
Well, and the micro hydro for sure. People are definitely doing private micro hydro.
And it's not altogether clear what the regulatory framework for that reasonably is and how do you buffer variability in that and so on.
That has been getting better. We talked about that at the Water Engine Nexus Symposium, which actually, I should put that on the site. If you go to watercatconsulting.com, that's even before WaterCitizen, when I did that with Department of Energy. And one of the areas we talked about was microhydro and also other agricultural issues and water management. Now, actually, that ties back into the earlier question about India. This idea of land management, water management, pre-green revolution. What was that?
So basically, the story in India is that there was famine in the 1960s, and that was bad. And part of the reason for the famine was that there was hoarding of grain by merchants who wanted to sell it for high prices. So the government set up a public distribution system, which means they had to procure grain from farmers first and then give it out at controlled prices when there's a drought to avoid a famine situation.
That was the Green Revolution?
No, that's just around the time of the Green Revolution. And so coincidentally, the Green Revolution was ushered in by Norman Borlaug and people coming in. And it took root only in a few states in India because the chief ministers of those states were forward-looking and invited this. So that's 1960s. So you go through tremendous increase in agricultural productivity in some parts of the country. Roughly a sixth of the area of the country produces 90% of the grain of the country. Impressive, right? But the thing is that this is like Southern Cal in terms of rainfall, okay, or intermediate between Southern Cal and Northern Cal. So you can't make it without doing irrigation. Same story as Southern Cal. So originally there was a large dam that was built in that area.
What part of India is it?
Northwest.
Okay.
And so that worked for a while. But then people who didn't have access to canal water complained. So the politicians who ran for local elections promised those guys free electricity. They got elected. They gave them free electricity. So that's how the groundwater extraction story developed.
Same kind of thing in the Ogallala and the American West. Basically, what happened with the RIAs, the rural electric associations, is that suddenly people were not just having hand dug wells, that they could put big pumps, high horsepower pumps into our wells. That's when the groundwater levels really started dropping, when we introduced electricity.
So in India, it's 60 to 100 horsepower pumps now, and groundwater levels have dropped to 400 meters in some places, 1,200 feet below surface. Exciting. Imagine you run a hydropower plant, a good hydropower plant, running with 100 meters of head. You're pumping from 400. So that's the energy consumption that goes with that. So that's what's been going on for free. And farmers in India don't pay income tax. Their crops get procured for cost of production plus a percentage, which usually brings it to global prices or higher. And then since they're poor, the government sells the same grain back to them at subsidized prices, which is like a third of what they bought it for. So it's a pretty interesting setup, right? So So what's been happening is that you have, as I was saying earlier, significant drops in groundwater, significant amount of energy consumption, and particularly in a drought, the pumps are on all the time, so the manufacturing sector doesn't get electricity. So they buy their own diesel generators and generate. So that's three times the cost of grid power. So as a result, India is not competitive with China on manufacturing, just on labor cost and input costs. So that's that kills that sector essentially. So you have outsourcing of call centers and things like that. That's where the economy has gone.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a disproportionate amount of the state spending goes towards giving the free electricity and buying up the grains, then selling it back for cheap, and so on, and
So
then hammering the groundwater so
cycle,
that in a certain number of years in the future, which varies depending on where you are in the country, you're just going to run out of the groundwater, and that's the end of the game. So we worked on that from the farmer level. We worked with 12,000 farmers, and each one of them did a paired experiment. We suggested different ways of improving their water use efficiency in rice and wheat were the prime crops. And they would try it out. They would try out what we suggested on 1 acre of land and did whatever they did on the rest of it, and they compared. And the goal was to understand a financial business model that would actually make sense to the farmer to do unilateral action to improve their performance. And the conclusion was, well, you could use soil moisture sensors, and that was pretty cheap and lasted long enough, and you ended up with about as much reduction in water use, around 30% in rice water use, that you would get from much more expensive and sophisticated mechanisms for irrigation.
There was questions during the breakout discussions about what are some of the breakthroughs in weather, and it's not the big breakthroughs. It's miniaturization. It's the what can you do quick, cheap.
Right.
That
So
you can actually
see
do on a
that
mass
fits
scale.
here because when we were trying to buy soil moisture sensors from companies here, Campbell Scientific, Decagon, the typical ones. By the time you put a system together, it was over $1,000 per farm, and we started manufacturing these ourselves. And we started with a mechanical device which cost $6 to make, and we were giving it out for free in our experiments. And now we are on an electronically based device which has Wi-Fi. It can communicate with pumps, and it can digitally send data to a cell phone and things like that.
How much per system?
40 is what it costs us to make it.
That's a lot less than 1,000.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I think there's a sea change in that. However, the thing was that we had very high adoption rates in the first couple of years with the farmers, and then it sort of dropped off because the farmers still felt this was additional work for them to monitor the system and so forth. And if the electricity is free, why do I care?
It's cost, it's ease, and then that's when social pressure starts coming. That's when education and awareness really.
The thing is, the government lever is very important. So what we did is we did experiments where we said that we realized that industry is spending 3 times as much as the grid electricity that you're getting for free. So suppose you save X units of electricity rather than water, but they're equivalent, right?
Right.
So we would give you a credit for that on your electric bill, which is free, but you pay a connection fee. So you would basically get, your connection fee back if you save enough. So effectively, what the idea was that improves their water use efficiency, and this is just a gimmick to get them to start thinking about what they're doing.
But I mean, it's doing something cool. It's like all the grants for solar. Everybody's putting solar on their house, and money wise, maybe they come out a wash, but they're cool because hey, we got solar on our house.
Right.
We're green.
So this was a successful experiment. But again, the politicians were nervous about doing this because they don't know how the public might react and if they'll get elected or not. So we did another thing, which is we looked at where should each crop be grown, in terms of improving the water outcomes and the energy outcomes. So we did an optimization model at the whole country at the county resolution, and we collected like a ridiculous amount of data on productivity, cost of cultivation of each crop, etc., and how much water was being used by these people. And we used daily climate data for the last 110 years that was available in India at the county level. And the objective of the optimization model was to maximize the net farm revenue for the whole country put together while meeting the food requirements, the nutrition requirements, while not increasing at the county level the existing crop area or the existing irrigated area. And I had no idea what would happen when we ran this model. But what we found was that the optimal solution roughly increases the net farm revenue by a factor of two, eliminates the groundwater depletion, and dramatically reduces the energy use as we go through. So, the answer was you can dink around with trying to change farmer behavior. You can dink around with experiments on charging them for electricity. But if the government would just simply procure from the right places, because that's the biggest lever they have, you essentially solve the whole problem. And so, we are trying to do something similar for the US because here the crop insurance program in some places offers a subsidy as much as $9 for $1 of premium coverage for the crop insurance. Go figure. Why would you do that? So you're taking the riskiest places and subsidizing them heavily so farmers grow and start growing stuff there when they weren't before. And now you have a water problem.
Well, this is a conversation we should have on the water show another day.
Okay.
Because I know our computer is not thinking around. It keeps giving me the battery is low. My
Sure.
my water energy nexus crisis. And I know that you have to get trained.
Right.
So I'm really glad that we had a chance to sit
Great.
and
Thanks
chat
very
and
much.
just share with the water citizens. And for more information, click below for the link for the agenda for the rest of the week. If you're not there right now, go to thewatershow.org, or it might be at thewatershow.org / USWPNOAA, U.S. Water Partnership, National NOAA. And that's where that's going to live. And please do make sure to share this with all the folks in
Sure.
Columbia.
Send me a link.
I'll send you the link, and then you can watch it tomorrow since you won't be
Fantastic.
here. And they're going to talk more tomorrow about water and food. That's going to be one of the major topics of one of the panels tomorrow. So thanks very much, folks.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. Yeah.